why didn't Viserys Targaryen and Rhaenys Targaryen just marry? A question many fans of House of the Dragon often ask. It would seemingly solve so many issues and negate one of the most integral reasons that allowed for the Dance of the Dragons to happen in the first place, and thus the impact it had on the downfall of House Targaryen. Surely, the whole mess could have been avoided if the two were just married. Well, this is one of those elements of the backstory I think House of the Dragon did quite a poor job at explaining. When you watch the show in isolation, it's a very fair question to ask. And I'd even argue, as a book fan, the concept still highlights some of the key issues with the later years of the reign of King Viserys that set the stage for the Dance of the Dragons. In truth, there are sort of three answers to this question, but each I think adds its own element of intrigue to the world building. You have the timeline issue, the context issue, and finally the real world issues that factored into how George R.R. Martin wrote Fire and Blood. So in this video, we're going to break down these issues and answer why the hell Rhaenys and Viserys just didn't marry. Now first off, we have to look at the timeline of events, which in itself makes it very clear why they never could have married. In the year 90 AC, the then 16-year-old Princess Rhaenys married Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides, in a match very much of her own choosing. The year prior, in 89 AC, she'd asked her grandfather, King Viserys, for permission to marry Lord Corlys, which the king agreed to. Then, in 93 AC, the 15-year-old Viserys Targaryen married his cousin, Aemma, whom was 11 years old at the time. They waited 2 years to consummate the marriage. Now, here is where the context and timeline really come into play when it comes to this question. One key event happened in between the marriage of Rhaenys and the marriage of Viserys to their respective matches, and that was the unexpected death of Prince Aemon Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne on the Island of Tarth at the age of 36 in the year 92 AC. Aemon was Jaehaerys' eldest living son, and heir to the Iron Throne, and importantly for this discussion, Rhaenys' father. Now here is the thing, and for me the key reason as to why a match between Rhaenys and Viserys in 89 AC didn't really seem that appealing. Aemon was a strong heir, already with a daughter in Rhaenys. Baelon, Jaehaerys' second son, and thus Viserys, were not really in the picture yet in terms of succession at this point. So when presented with a match between Rhaenys and Corlys, it's a politically sensible choice for Jaehaerys to allow it. Close ties between House Targaryen and Velaryon up until then had always been a good thing. And by this point, Corlys Velaryon was famous across the world for his 9 voyages and one of the richest men in Westeros. It's only when you look back in hindsight the issue with the match appears. There was no way to have known Aemon would be dead by 92 AC. While he was yet to father a son, he was still a young man, and there was plenty of time for him left to do so. However, something that I think is fair to point out is perhaps it should have been a bit more alarming that in 22 years of marriage to Jocelyn Baratheon, they'd only had one child in Rhaenys, and that by 89 AC, when Rhaenys was betrothed to Corlys, that was 15 years prior. Seemingly, the pair had issues conceiving, and maybe this should have been a consideration when Jaehaerys allowed the match between Rhaenys and Corlys. When Aemon died in 92 AC, there was of course a push, spearheaded by Jocelyn Baratheon and Queen Alysanne, for Rhaenys to be named heir to Jaehaerys, being Aemon's eldest child. But the king instead opted for his second son, Baelon, whom at this point had 2 heirs of his own, in Viserys and Daemon. Of course, there was pushback to the idea of Rhaenys being passed over, but Jaehaerys had made his choice. Now this is where, looking at the issues that caused the Dance of the Dragons, and the idea of a match between Rhaenys and Viserys seems appealing, joining the lines of both claimants. But Rhaenys was already married and pregnant by this point, thus why this match could never have happened, and why Viserys in turn married Aemma, which in itself was another good political match. It's only looking back at the history of Westeros, the idea of a match between Rhaenys and Viserys is raised as a solution to a problem that didn't exist yet. You just have to remember, the solution comes with the power of the hindsight of events to come. When Jaehaerys allowed Rhaenys to marry Corlys, there was no way to have predicted the death of Aemon in 92 AC, which in turn upends the whole succession. In an ideal world where you know how events were going to play out, it would have been a good solution to prevent the Dance of the Dragons from happening. But that's not how history works. I do think House of the Dragon did a really good job at giving viewers the backstory that was important to the plot, given how little time they had due to the pace the show needed to move at to cover the amount of story being told. But I will concede elements as to why this match could not have happened, given the timeline were very much brushed over and does leave the viewer asking questions. The change to how the show portrayed the Great Council of 101 as a choice between Rhaenys and Viserys rather than Viserys and Laenor as in the book also didn't help the issue and only muddied the implied timeline for viewers further. So in essence, the answer to the question in terms of a timeline and context sense is by the time the idea of Rhaenys marrying Viserys became, well, a good idea at the death of Aemon in 92 AC, it was already too late, given Rhaenys was already married. Thus why, in a way, the next best thing to quell the succession dispute between Viserys and Rhaenys is for their own children to marry each other and join their claims, which is what happens years later with Rhaenyra and Laenor. But as the events of the Dance of the Dragons proves, succession is never simple, and just as you fix one issue in marrying Rhaenyra and Laenor, you create another in Aegon and Viserys' Children by Alicent Hightower. But let's just say for a second, you could go back in time and tell Jaehaerys what's about to happen, and have him marry Rhaenys and Viserys. What exactly would then happen when Aemon dies? Does Rhaenys become queen? Or does Jaehaerys carry on with his male preference and still name Baelon heir? Albeit with less resistance from the likes of Queen Alysanne, given the match between Rhaenys and Viserys, meaning she will still be queen. But the issue is more complicated than that. Namely, in this circumstance, who exactly is going to be the ruling party here? Going the Baelon route would mean that Viserys would be the ruling party, limiting the power Rhaenys would hold. The alternative would be Rhaenys as a ruling queen and Viserys as a prince consort. Neither solution is perfect and presents its own set of complicated issues. But if either of these events came to pass, it would prevent the circumstances that allowed for the Dance of the Dragons to happen. Rhaenys and Viserys' theoretical child would still have the strength of both their parents' claim, but without firm succession laws that were more codified in a way which you could argue the Great Council of 101 tried to do. I do believe an event like the Dance of the Dragons would have been inevitable at some point in time or another. But there is an answer to this question that has nothing to do with the fictional history and lore of Westeros, a more real-world practical issue that leads to the question being asked in the first place. The first real look at the Dance of the Dragons we were given were from the little we get from the main book series and the novellas, The Princess and the Queen and The Rogue Prince. When George R. R. Martin wrote Fire and Blood, he had to work around what he'd already established in those novellas. While some aspects of the novellas were changed when they were adapted into Fire and Blood, for the most part, George had to work around events he had already established. In a way, work backwards from what he already had. Part of what was already established was the fact that Rhaenys married Corlys. Thus, even if George wanted to have Rhaenys and Viserys marry, it would have been a very difficult retcon, given how much of the novellas hinge on that fact. The difference between the novellas and Fire and Blood is a video I am working on. I also plan to delve into how George went about creating his world history, working backwards from what he'd already established in the main books. I have no idea when that will be ready, because it's taking a lot of research. So the short answer to this question as to why Rhaenys was never married to Viserys, it's simply the fact she married Corlys before her father died, unexpectedly setting off a chain reaction of the succession crisis that set House Targaryen on a path to the Dance of the Dragons. But I think it's clear, given what we know about both Rhaenys and Viserys as characters, that the match between them doesn't solve issues such as who would be the ruling party and who would be the consort. You then have the real-world way in which George R. R. Martin had to retroactively write around events he'd already established in novellas when he came to write Fire and Blood. The lore of A Song of Ice and Fire is deep and complex. However, situations like this are very much a symptom of George R. R. Martin's gardener approach to writing, which is how he's always worked, even if it does sometimes create issues such as this that need to be written around.